It started like any other live stream, a young woman smiling into her phone, talking to her followers, tens of thousands watching her every move. But at 2:37 in the morning, the camera shook, and then she whispered, "Is someone in here?" The chat exploded, and then the screen went black. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. But what no one knew was that the stream never actually ended. What happened in those final moments would haunt investigators for months, and the truth, when it finally emerged, was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of Alyssa Cole, the influencer who live-streamed her own disappearance and the chilling mystery that followed. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about the people you follow online and what they're willing to do for attention. Her name was Alyssa Cole, a 27-year-old influencer from Portland, Oregon. To her followers, she was a rising star. Beauty tutorials, morning routines, product reviews, the usual content that attracted hundreds of thousands of followers. She had that girl next door quality that made people feel like they knew her, like they were friends. But behind the filters and the perfectly curated posts was someone chasing more than likes. She was chasing validation, chasing relevance, chasing something that always seemed just out of reach no matter how many followers she gained. Friends described her as restless, obsessed with how she looked on camera, terrified of becoming irrelevant in an industry that moved at lightning speed. Former roommate Jessica Martinez told police that Alyssa would check her phone constantly, sometimes waking up in the middle of the night to respond to comments or monitor her analytics. She couldn't separate herself from her online persona anymore. It was like she existed more online than she did in real life. One friend, Marcus Chen, recalled a conversation they had about 2 weeks before she disappeared. She told him she was starting to hear things, or thought someone was watching her through her own phone. He laughed it off, told her she was spending too much time online, but she wasn't joking. She was genuinely scared. Marcus said Alyssa had become convinced that someone was monitoring her, tracking her movements, knowing things about her that she hadn't shared publicly. He suggested she take a break from social media, maybe see a therapist, but Alyssa refused. She said she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to hitting 1 million followers. She said that once she reached that milestone, everything would be different, everything would be worth it. But she never made it to 1 million. She disappeared at 973,000 followers, just 27,000 away from her goal. By early June, Alyssa's followers started noticing a change. Her once bright, energetic live streams turned darker, quieter. She'd sit there for minutes at a time, saying nothing, just staring at the camera with an expression that was hard to read. Sometimes she'd whisper to someone off-screen, though later police confirmed she lived alone. The comments during these streams were mixed. Some viewers thought it was a new performance art piece, a way to go viral through mystery and intrigue. Others expressed genuine concern, asking if she was okay, suggesting she get help. But behind the scenes, something else was happening, something Alyssa hadn't shared with anyone. She had been receiving messages, hundreds of them, from an account simply called Mirror Watcher. At first, the messages seemed harmless, almost flattering. "You look beautiful today. I love watching you create." But gradually, they became more specific, more invasive. "That blue dress looks even better in person than on camera. You seemed tired when you came home at 3:15 yesterday. I noticed you've been having trouble sleeping." The messages demonstrated knowledge that no online follower should have, details about her private life that she'd never shared publicly. Alyssa blocked the account multiple times, but new accounts would appear, all with variations of the same name, all continuing the same pattern of messages. She reported it to the platforms, but the accounts never violated community guidelines enough to warrant serious action. They never made explicit threats, never used profane language. They just watched and commented and knew things they shouldn't know. If someone online knew your every move, what would you do? Would you go to the police, even without concrete threats? Would you stop posting entirely, give up everything you'd built? Or would you do what Alyssa did and convince yourself it was just part of being in the public eye, just the price of the fame you'd been chasing? Think about it. Comment below and let me know. June 14th, 2:03 in the morning, Alyssa went live. This wasn't unusual for her. She developed a habit of late-night streams, times when she said she felt most authentic, most connected to her core followers. That night, about 8,000 people tuned in within the first few minutes. But something was different from the start. Alyssa looked nervous, her eyes darting around her bedroom, her hands fidgeting with her hair, her necklace, anything to keep them busy. She kept glancing over her shoulder at the closed door behind her. The comments started flooding in. "Are you okay? What's wrong? Is this a new video series?" She forced a smile and said, "I just need to show you guys something. I've been keeping this to myself for too long, and I think it's time you knew." Her voice was shaky, uncertain. She picked up her phone and started walking through her apartment, the camera shaking slightly with each step. "For the past month, I've been experiencing something I can't explain. Things moving in my apartment. Sounds I can't identify. And messages. So many messages from someone who seems to know everything about me." She showed her message inbox briefly, thousands of unread messages, many from accounts with similar names, all variations of Mirror Watcher. "I thought I was losing my mind," she continued. "But then I started documenting things, keeping evidence, and I realized something." She paused in front of a mirror, the camera pointed at her reflection. "What if the person watching me isn't a stranger at all?" The chat exploded with questions, theories, concern. Some viewers told her to call the police immediately. Others accused her of staging everything for attention. The view count hit 12,000, then 15,000. People were sharing the stream, tagging friends, spreading word that something was happening. At 2:27, Alyssa returned to her bedroom and sat on her bed, facing the camera. "There's a folder on my laptop," she said quietly. "If anything happens to me, I need you all to tell the police to check the folder. It's labeled Mirror. Everything I've documented is in there." She looked directly into the camera, and for a moment, the performance dropped entirely. What viewers saw was genuine fear. "I know some of you think this is fake," she said. "I know some of you think I'm doing this for views or to go viral. But I'm telling you, something is wrong. Someone has been in my apartment. Someone has been watching me. And I think tonight they're going to make their move." At 2:34, the lights in her apartment flickered. It was subtle at first, just a momentary dimming, but Alyssa noticed immediately. Her head snapped toward the ceiling light, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" she whispered to the camera. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Some viewers reported hearing a sound in the background, though others heard nothing unusual. Alyssa stood up slowly, the phone camera now pointed at her closed bedroom door. "He's outside," she whispered, so quietly that the microphone barely picked it up. The chat was scrolling too fast to read now. Thousands of messages per second, a mix of panic, excitement, skepticism, and concern. The view count hit 22,000. If you're still here, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's actually watching through the chills, because what comes next is where this story transforms from strange to absolutely unexplainable. And if you believe people like Mirror Watcher should be stopped, if you think no one deserves to be stalked and terrorized for simply existing online, hit that subscribe button now. Don't let people who violate others' privacy and safety think they can get away with it. At 2:36, everything changed. The doorknob to her bedroom started turning slowly. Alyssa's breathing became audible, rapid, and shallow. She backed up until she hit the wall, the camera shaking violently. The door opened, but the hallway beyond was completely dark, too dark to see anything. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Just Alyssa pressed against the wall, pointing her phone at the open doorway, and 23,000 people watching, unable to do anything but witness. Then a shadow moved in the darkness. It was indistinct, just a shift in the blackness, but it was there. Alyssa screamed, and the camera dropped. The last thing viewers saw before the screen went black was the ceiling of her bedroom, the light fixture still flickering, and the shadow crossing into frame. Then, nothing. The stream showed a black screen with the loading symbol spinning, then an error message. This live stream has ended. 23,000 people sat in shocked silence, fingers hovering over keyboards, unsure what they just witnessed. Within 15 minutes of the stream ending, concerned viewers had called Portland Police Department. Multiple calls came in, all reporting the same thing. An influencer named Alyssa Cole had been attacked during a live stream, and they had the URL, the timestamp, everything the police would need to verify the incident. Officers Daniel Rodriguez and Sarah Kim arrived at Alyssa's apartment building at 2:58, just 21 minutes after the stream had ended. They knocked on her door. No answer. They announced themselves as police. Still nothing. The building manager was called to unlock the door. What they found was confusing and deeply unsettling. The apartment door had been locked from the inside. Deadbolt engaged, chain lock in place. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no disturbed locks. The apartment itself was eerily normal. Lights were on in the living room and bedroom. There was a half-finished cup of tea on the kitchen counter, still slightly warm. Alyssa's laptop sat open on her desk, screen illuminated but showing only her desktop wallpaper. And there, on her bedroom floor, was her phone. The screen was completely shattered, as if it had been smashed repeatedly against something hard. But Alyssa herself was gone. Her purse was still there, her wallet, ID, credit cards, all untouched. Her keys hung by the door. Her car was still in the building's garage. It was as if she had simply vanished from a locked apartment, leaving everything behind except herself. Officer Kim noticed something odd about the laptop. Despite the screen being on, there was activity happening in the background. The hard drive light was blinking rapidly, indicating files were being accessed or transferred. She touched the trackpad and the screen came to life, showing a folder open on the desktop labeled Mirror, exactly as Alyssa had mentioned in her stream. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled with a date going back approximately 6 weeks. She opened one at random. It showed Alyssa's bedroom from the perspective of her phone camera, footage from one of her live streams. Nothing unusual. She was about to close the folder when she noticed one file at the bottom. It was labeled with tomorrow's date, June 15th, and had a timestamp of 2:37 in the morning. The exact time Alyssa's stream had ended the previous night, but dated for the following day. That file had been created at 3:14 in the morning, approximately 16 minutes after the stream ended, and approximately 8 minutes after police had arrived on scene. Officer Kim tried to open it, but the file was corrupted, or locked, or something. The media player threw an error message. She made a note to have the forensics team examine it. Meanwhile, Officer Rodriguez had found something else. In Alyssa's bathroom, written in condensation on the mirror, were 3 words: "Still watching you." The mirror was still fogged, as if someone had taken a hot shower very recently, though the bathroom was cold and there was no moisture anywhere else. The message was fresh. It couldn't have been there long. But how was that possible? The apartment had been locked from inside. No one could have entered or left without breaking the locks. Detectives Rachel Foster and Thomas Wang took over the case the following morning. They reviewed every piece of evidence, watched the entire live stream multiple times, interviewed friends, family, and dozens of Alyssa's most active online followers. They traced the Mirror Watcher accounts but hit dead ends repeatedly. The accounts used VPNs, temporary email addresses, and other methods to obscure their origin. But then the digital forensics team discovered something that changed everything. The IP address that had sent many of the Mirror Watcher messages traced back to Alyssa's own home network. Not someone hacking her network from outside, but actually originating from within her apartment. More specifically, the messages had been sent from her own laptop during times when Alyssa was documentably elsewhere. Someone had access to her apartment and her devices and had been using them to torment her, making it seem like the threat was coming from strangers online when in fact it was much closer to home. Detective Foster examined the laptop more carefully. She found evidence of remote access software installed, hidden deep in the system files. Someone could access Alyssa's laptop from anywhere, see what she was doing, access her files, her camera, her microphone. That person could watch her without her knowledge, learn her patterns, her schedule, her fears. They could send messages from her own device, making it nearly impossible to trace back to the actual source. But who had installed this software, and when? The forensics team estimated it had been there for at least 3 months, possibly longer. That meant someone had physical access to Alyssa's laptop months ago, long enough to install the software and begin their surveillance. The investigation took a strange turn when they examined that corrupted file dated June 15th. A specialist in digital forensics managed to partially reconstruct it. What he found was impossible to explain through conventional means. The file contained footage, approximately 2 minutes long, showing Alyssa sitting in a room that didn't match any room in her apartment. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting harsh and industrial. Alyssa sat perfectly still, facing the camera, her expression blank, her eyes open but unfocused. She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there as the camera slowly panned around her. And then, in the reflection of what appeared to be a two-way mirror behind her, there was another figure. The figure wore clothes identical to what Alyssa had been wearing in her final live stream. Same shirt, same necklace, same hairstyle. But the face was obscured, turned away from the camera at just the right angle to remain hidden. The footage ended abruptly, cutting to black with no further information. The metadata embedded in the file showed it had been created after Alyssa disappeared, encoded at 3:14 in the morning on June 14th. But that should have been impossible. The laptop had been sitting untouched on Alyssa's desk. The apartment had been secured. No one had accessed it. Yet somehow this file had been created, encoded, and saved. The case generated massive media attention. Within days, millions of people had watched Alyssa's final live stream, downloaded and archived by viewers before the platform removed it. True Crime Podcasts dissected every second of footage. Reddit threads analyzed every frame, looking for clues investigators might have missed. YouTube channels dedicated to mysteries and unsolved cases featured Alyssa's disappearance, each presenting their own theories. The most common theory was abduction, that someone had been stalking Alyssa, gained access to her apartment through some unknown means, and taken her during the chaos of the live stream. But that didn't explain the locked door, the lack of forced entry, or the mysterious file created after she vanished. Another theory gaining traction was that Alyssa had staged her own disappearance. That she'd planned the entire thing as the ultimate viral stunt, that she was hiding somewhere waiting for the perfect moment to reappear. Proponents of this theory pointed to her obsession with reaching 1 million followers, her increasingly strange behavior, and the convenient timing of everything. Weeks passed with no breaks in the case. Alyssa's family held a press conference pleading for information. Her mother, Linda Cole, broke down crying as she described her daughter. Alyssa was a sweet girl who just wanted to make people happy. She got caught up in the social media world, yes, but she didn't deserve whatever happened to her. If anyone knows anything, please come forward. Her father, Robert Cole, offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to Alyssa's whereabouts. Tips flooded in, but none led anywhere substantial. Supposed sightings in other cities that turned out to be lookalikes. Claims from psychics and mediums offering to channel Alyssa's spirit. Anonymous messages claiming responsibility that were quickly determined to be hoaxes from attention seekers. The investigation seemed to be at a standstill. If you believe no one deserves to vanish without answers, if you think Alyssa's family deserves to know what happened to their daughter, hit that like button now. Show the algorithm that stories like this matter, that we don't forget about people just because their case gets complicated or strange. And comment justice for Alyssa if you're not siding with whoever did this. Then, 1 month after Alyssa's disappearance, something happened that reignited everything. On July 14th, at exactly 2:37 in the morning, Alyssa's account went live again. Automated alerts went out to her followers, many of whom had never unfollowed despite her disappearance. Within seconds, thousands of people clicked on the notification, wondering if this was Alyssa returning, or the police making an announcement, or some hacker exploiting the situation. What they found was 2 minutes of footage that would become the most analyzed video in internet history. The screen showed a dark room, almost completely black except for a faint glow in the center. As viewers' eyes adjusted, they could make out shapes. A concrete wall, similar to the one in the Impossible file, a single chair in the middle of the frame, and sitting in that chair, barely visible, was a figure. The camera didn't move, didn't zoom, just maintained its fixed position for the entire 2 minutes. Some viewers claimed they could see the figure breathing, that it moved slightly, shifted its weight. Others said it was completely still, more like a mannequin than a person. The figure's face was in shadow, impossible to identify with certainty, though the build and posture seemed consistent with Alyssa. After exactly 120 seconds, the figure stood up and walked toward the camera. As it approached, passing through better light, viewers got a clearer look. It was definitely a woman, definitely matching Alyssa's approximate height and build, but just before the face came fully into view, just as the audience held their collective breath waiting for confirmation, the figure stopped. And in the dark screen of a phone visible in the shot, in the reflection, they saw something that made thousands of people's blood run cold. The figure was smiling, not a natural smile, not the warm, engaging smile Alyssa was known for, but something else. Something that looked performative, artificial, wrong. Then the stream ended abruptly, cutting to black just as suddenly as it had begun. Police were notified immediately about the stream. Detective Foster and her team traced the broadcast, hoping it would finally provide the breakthrough they needed. But what they found only deepened the mystery. The stream had been broadcast from an IP address registered to a server farm in Iceland, routed through multiple proxy servers across 3 continents. The account's login credentials had been accessed from that same network, using passwords that only Alyssa should have known. There was no way to determine the actual physical location where the video had been recorded. The forensics team analyzed every pixel of the footage, running it through enhancement software, comparing it to known images of Alyssa, searching for any identifying details about the location. They found nothing conclusive. The room could have been anywhere. What they did find was audio. Hidden beneath the ambient sound of the room, barely detectable without specialized equipment, was a voice. The same voice from Alyssa's original live stream, whispering the same words, "Still watching you." But the voice had been digitally altered, passed through filters that made it impossible to determine if it was male or female, young or old, even if it was human at all. It could have been Alyssa's own voice, manipulated beyond recognition. It could have been someone else entirely. The audio team couldn't provide any definite answers. The second stream generated even more theories. Some people became convinced that Alyssa was being held captive somewhere, forced to participate in these broadcasts. They organized online groups dedicated to finding her, analyzing every frame of footage. Others believed she was dead, and these streams were pre-recorded footage being released by her killer as some sick game. And still others maintained she was orchestrating everything herself, that this was the most elaborate viral campaign ever created. Detective Foster continued pursuing conventional leads. She tracked down everyone who had been in Alyssa's apartment during the relevant time frame. She interviewed Marcus Chen multiple times, pressed him on whether he'd installed anything on Alyssa's laptop, whether he'd had access to her passwords. Marcus maintained his innocence, provided alibis for the night of the disappearance, and voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test that showed no deception. She looked into ex-boyfriends, former collaborators, anyone who might have had motive and opportunity. Every lead went nowhere. 6 months after Alyssa disappeared, Detective Foster got a call from a tech security researcher named David Park. He'd been following the case and believed he'd found something the police had missed. He explained that he specialized in analyzing malware and surveillance software. He'd obtained copies of the forensic reports and had noticed something in the code of the remote access software. The software had a keylogging component that recorded every keystroke Alyssa made, every password she entered, every private message she sent. But here's what made it truly disturbing. The software had been collecting data for approximately 8 months, far longer than initially estimated. That meant whoever installed it had been watching Alyssa for most of a year before the messages from Mirror Watcher even started. They'd been learning her patterns, her vulnerabilities, her fears, building a psychological profile before making their presence known. David had traced the server receiving the data through several layers of obfuscation. He couldn't pinpoint an exact location, but he'd narrowed it down to a region. The server was located within 20 miles of Portland. Whoever was behind this wasn't some distant stranger. They were local, close enough to have physical access to Alyssa, close enough to potentially enter her apartment whenever they wanted. Detective Foster obtained warrants to investigate further. They identified 3 possible physical locations for the server within the 20-mile radius. Teams were dispatched to all 3 locations simultaneously. At the first 2 locations, they found nothing relevant. That left the private residence, the home of Professor Nathan Hargrove, age 46, who taught computer science at Portland State University. Officers approached Professor Hargrove's home cautiously. After several minutes of knocking and announcing, they made the decision to breach the door. Inside, they found a home that seemed normal until they reached the bedroom. The walls were covered with printouts of screenshots, hundreds of them, all showing Alyssa. Pictures from her social media frames captured from her live streams, candid shots that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge. In the corner was a sophisticated computer setup, multiple monitors, server equipment, and sitting at that desk, staring at the screens, was Professor Hargrove. He didn't resist arrest. At the station, after being read his rights, he finally spoke. I wondered how long it would take. I didn't try very hard to hide in the end. I think part of me wanted to be found. Detective Foster conducted the interrogation herself. Where was Alyssa Cole? Professor Hargrove's answer was chilling in its simplicity. I don't know. I never touched her. I never even spoke to her in person. Everything was digital. I watched her, yes. I monitored her. I sent the messages. I installed the software. But I never physically harmed her. I wouldn't. That was never the point. Detective Foster pressed him. Then what was the point? Why terrorize her? Hargrove leaned back in his chair. You have to understand. My research is about the psychological effects of surveillance, how awareness of being watched changes behavior. Alyssa was perfect because she already performed for an audience every day. I wanted to see what would happen if that surveillance became more personal, more invasive. Would she crack? Would she thrive on it? Would she try to fight back? It was an experiment. Detective Foster felt her stomach turn. An experiment? She was a person. Where is she now? What happened the night of her final stream? Hargrove shook his head. I told you, I don't know. I was watching. Yes, I saw everything her followers saw. But when the stream went black, I lost access too. I tried to reconnect to her laptop, to her phone, but everything was offline. I thought maybe she figured out the surveillance and destroyed her devices. But then she never reappeared, and I realized something else had happened. Something I hadn't planned. What do you think about Professor Hargrove's claim? Do you believe he was just watching, or was he more involved than he admitted? Comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe people like Hargrove who exploit others for their twisted experiments should face the harshest possible consequences, make sure you're subscribed. The interrogation continued for hours. Hargrove maintained his position. Yes, he'd stalked Alyssa digitally. Yes, he'd terrorized her with messages. Yes, he'd been conducting an unauthorized and deeply unethical psychological experiment. But he insisted he had nothing to do with her physical disappearance. His lawyer eventually stopped the interrogation, but police had enough evidence to charge Hargrove with stalking, computer crimes, and unauthorized surveillance. They searched his home thoroughly, examined every file on his servers, and found extensive documentation of his monitoring of Alyssa. But they found no evidence he'd ever been to her apartment, no indication he'd physically abducted her, nothing that explained what actually happened the night she vanished. Professor Hargrove went to trial 8 months after his arrest. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of his stalking and surveillance of Alyssa. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding him guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. But as he was being led away, he turned to Detective Foster and said something that would haunt her. You're looking in the wrong direction. The answer isn't where she went. It's where she already was. What did he mean by that? Detective Foster couldn't stop thinking about it. Where Alyssa already was. She was online, constantly, obsessively. She was in her apartment. She was in her own head, struggling with identity and reality. Detective Foster went back to Alyssa's private writings, notes she'd found buried in deleted files. In one note dated June 10th, 4 days before she vanished, Alyssa wrote, Sometimes I look at my reflection and I don't recognize the person staring back. The girl online feels more real than the one in this body. What if she's the real me? What if this physical version is just the shadow? Another note, dated June 12th. I've been thinking about what would happen if I just disappeared. Not died, not ran away, but just stopped being physical. What if I could exist only in the streams, only as pixels and data? Would anyone even notice the difference? Would I? Detective Foster showed these notes to a forensic psychologist who specialized in cases involving technology and mental health. The psychologist reviewed everything and provided her assessment. This young woman was experiencing a severe identity crisis, exacerbated by constant surveillance and her obsessive relationship with social media. These notes suggest she was contemplating some form of escape, Not physical suicide, but a kind of psychological dissolution. She was fantasizing about becoming purely digital, about abandoning her physical existence entirely. But that's not possible, Detective Foster said. People don't just dissolve into their online personas. The psychologist nodded. Of course. But consider what we know. She felt trapped between two versions of herself. What if she found a way to stage the ultimate performance? A disappearance so complete that she could reinvent herself entirely? Start over somewhere with no digital footprint, no online presence, completely off the grid? The investigation expanded to look for evidence of Alyssa planning an escape. They examined transportation records, hotel registrations, rental agreements, bank accounts, nothing. If Alyssa had planned to disappear and start over, she'd left no financial trail. The case seemed to be fragmenting into multiple theories, none fully satisfying. The case officially remained open but inactive, one of thousands of missing persons investigations that ran out of leads. Alyssa's social media accounts remained active, maintained by her family, in hopes she might one day return. Her last post, the Final Livestream, stayed up as a memorial and a plea for information, watched by new viewers every day. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of social media, about the vulnerability of living your life publicly, about the invisible watchers that might be closer than you think. For those who knew Alyssa personally, the ambiguity was the hardest part. Her mother, Linda, never stopped hoping her daughter would come home. She maintained Alyssa's childhood bedroom exactly as it had been, kept her phone number active in case she ever called. Her father, Robert, turned his grief into advocacy, working with organizations to pass stricter laws around cyberstalking and online harassment. Marcus Chen left social media entirely, unable to participate in platforms that had played such a central role in his friend's disappearance. The mystery of what happened to Alyssa Cole in those final moments may never be fully solved. Perhaps she successfully escaped and rebuilt a life somewhere under a new name, finally free from the pressure of being seen. Perhaps something more tragic occurred that night. Perhaps the truth is something no one has yet imagined. What we know for certain is that a young woman who wanted more than anything to be watched, to be seen, to matter to strangers online, vanished from the world she built her identity around. And in her absence, she became more visible than she ever was in life. What do you think really happened to Alyssa Cole? Do you believe she's alive somewhere, living quietly off the grid? Or do you think something worse happened that night? Comment "Justice for Alyssa" if you believe her case deserves to remain open until real answers emerge. And if you think platforms need to do more to protect creators from stalkers and harassment, if you believe people like Professor Hargrove represent a real danger that society needs to address more seriously, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button if you stand against digital predators. The story of Alyssa Cole should make us all reflect on our relationship with social media, with visibility, with the performance of identity for public consumption. How much of ourselves do we give away for likes and follows? How many invisible watchers do we invite into our lives without realizing it? These aren't easy questions, but Alyssa's disappearance forces us to confront them. If you've watched this far, thank you for staying with Alyssa's story. Share this video with others who care about justice, who believe missing persons deserve attention regardless of how complicated their cases become. Subscribe if you want to see more deep dives into mysteries that challenge our understanding. Leave a comment sharing your theory, your thoughts, your feelings about this case. Let's keep the conversation going, because somewhere, whether she's alive or not, Alyssa Cole's story continues. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this video knows something that could finally bring resolution to her family and everyone who's been searching for answers. Until then, we remember her not just as a mystery, but as a person, a daughter, a friend, someone whose life mattered